did we finish the 13th chapter?
I don't think we finished 13.
No, we started at 14.
We started at 14.
Yeah,
I got an arrow pointing at
14.
We could just go over there and join him over there.
I mean, we can hack our way through this thing. I've been working on the next bunch. Well, good morning. So you guys are going to really be helping me a lot on this deal. Like I say, I've been working a little bit ahead because we're going to do Proverbs next, and a lot of good. I think that's going to be I look back through my stuff. I don't think we've done Proverbs in the morning since I've been doing it.
I don't think so.
I look back through all the. I've got where I've got all my files and stuff. It tells us when we've done stuff, and I don't have any notes at all on Proverbs. So I guess we're studying here in Zechariah, the 14th chapter, and Zechariah is continuing his prophecy about the coming of Jesus and the establishment of the kingdom. And I think one of the things that I think about the most in here, and when you read some of the modern commentaries, they're all pointing to the premillennial deal, and that's not what we're talking about here. These people had no idea what premillennialism was back in that time, and there's a lot of confusion about, obviously there's a kingdom established, but the kingdom is a church, and that's what Zechariah is talking about. So before we go any further, Keith, if you would lead our minds in prayer.
Come thanking you, Heavenly Father, for a night of rest, and thanking you for this opportunity to gather together to study from your word. We pray, Father, as we go through this study, we will be helpful to David as he presents the lesson. We pray, Father, that we can glean something from it that would be better for our use in the future. We ask you, Father, to bless us and keep everybody safe. Watch over us as we go through this class. I'm so thankful that your son Jesus gave his life for us. It's through his name we pray. Amen.
Okay, so let's look at the first verse here. Behold, the day of the Lord cometh, and thy spoil shall be divided in the midst of thee. For I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle, and the city shall be taken, and the houses rifled, and the women ravished, and the half of the city shall go forth into captivity, and the residue of the people shall not be cut off from the city. So I think obviously that's foretelling the time when the Jewish people are going to basically be devastated by the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 A.D. by Titus. And if you go back and you look at the history of that, the city was sieged for a while by Titus, and a lot of the Christians there, they escaped to they escaped, and there was a certain amount of the Jews that escaped to Masada, and that was kind of their stronghold until they were actually defeated there. And Masada, and that's a big hill, that mountain,
Megiddo.
huh? With Megiddo. I thought it was Masada.
You're probably right. Or I just didn't hear you.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I think there's a series coming on TV about that on the deal.
The
Maccabees, yeah. So the nations are all going to be gathered against Israel, because that's obviously the Roman Empire and all of their and all their people. And there is going to be a great battle, and the city is going to be taken. Jerusalem was completely destroyed by the Romans, and in that day and time, there was no Geneva Convention of how they were going to treat people. So part of them escaped, but then part of them were left, and they were cut off. So any other comments about that verse, or those two verses? So let's move on. It says, "Then shall the Lord go forth and fight against these nations, as when he fought in the day of the battle. And his feet shall stand in that upon that day, upon the Mount of Olives, which is before Jerusalem on the east, and the Mount of Olives shall clave to the midst thereof toward the east and toward the west, and it shall be a very great valley, and half of the mountain shall remove toward the north, and half toward the south. So, the Lord here moving. I think this kind of points to the to the establishment of the church, and the Lord clearing out the obstacles that was going to be taken for the for the Lord to establish the church. And it's I think fitting here that it talks about the Mount of Olives and the important part that plays in the story of Jesus. And of course, the east and the west, that's the rise and the fall of the sun. And I think we're just basically talking there about removing the obstacles or the things that is going to be necessary to establish the church. Any other opinions on that? Okay, let's look at verse 5. And ye shall flee to the valley of the mountains, and for the valley and the mountains shall reach into Azel, yea, ye shall flee, like ye fled from before the earthquake in the days of Uzziah, the king of Judah. And the Lord my God shall come, and all the saints with thee. So, we see here that talking again about the fleeing to the valley of the mountains, and I think that's a reference to the children of God fleeing away from the things of the things that the Romans were that they were doing. And obviously this is a reference here to a past event that, and like I say, I haven't looked it up about a past event that the children of that time would understand, because obviously this was an earthquake.
This is Isaiah 29:6.
Okay, and what does that say? Can you look at it for me, Kevin?
I didn't look.
And also there's a reference here to Joel 3:11. Keith, could you look that up for me real quick? Joel 3:11, and then Kevin, look up at Isaiah 29:6. See what that says.
I was talking to one gentleman, going back to verse 4 there. He said that is one of the key figures for the premillennials.
Mm-hmm.
He said that in that day, his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives. In other words, Christ is coming back
Right.
and will physically stand on the Mount of Olives.
Right. Well, and and Jesus stood on the Mount of Olives when he walked on the earth. And I'm just wondering if, in the time that Zechariah wrote this, if the Mount of Olives was actually identified at that particular time there in Jerusalem. That would be interesting to know whether that's something that the people would relate to, or if that was something that was in the future that they really didn't have an understanding about.
It could have been something that was unnamed at that time.
It could have been.
And it could have been that the Jews later started planting olives on that mountain, which gave it its name.
Right. Well, and all the way through here, if we didn't have the revelation of the New Testament today, we wouldn't understand a bit of this.
Well, we know that Jesus talks about this in Matthew 24 quite extensively, that these events are getting ready to happen, and will happen pretty soon.
Right.
In their generation.
Right.
And then also talk about the earthquake. My Bible references Amos 1 verse 1, which says, the words of Amos, who was among the sheep herders of Tekoa, which he saw concerning Israel in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah, and in the days of Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel, 2 years before the earthquake.
So this was something then that these people understood a time frame about.
Yeah.
What did you find there, Kevin?
It's just a reference to the word earthquake.
Okay.
You will be punished by the Lord of hosts with thunder and earthquake
Mm-hmm.
and great noise.
Okay. Keith, did you have any?
It just says, hasten and come, all you surrounding nations, and
right, that's good. Well, let's move on to verse 6 and see what we can glean out of that. And it shall come to pass in that day that the light shall not be clear nor dark. But it shall be one day which shall be known to the Lord, not day nor night, but it shall come to pass that at evening time it shall be light. And it shall be in that day that the living waters shall go out from Jerusalem, half of them toward the former sea, half of them toward the hinder sea, in summer and winter shall be. Reading it to see. I'm not sure exactly what the living waters. I think probably refers to to Jesus, and the word going out from Jerusalem, toward the out into the world, and we talked about before about being in that day. Obviously, talking about a particular event or a particular time frame, and this is probably a reference to something that either happened when around the time that Jesus was crucified and the church was established, or talking about the time when Jesus was walking on the earth. Any comments or thoughts on that verse? All right, let's move on to verse 9. And the Lord shall be king over all the earth, and in that day shall there be one Lord, and his name one. Obviously, that is a reference to the church and the establishment of one God, because these people that were around people who worshipped a whole lot of different gods, and Jesus is going to his church or his kingdom is going to be be spread throughout the earth. And I think this is probably another one that the premillennials look to establish that there's that there's a time that this is going to happen. One of the commentaries that I look at every now and then, more because he's really good on linking this to history, but he is a premillennialist, and he talks about the 1,000-year reign, and he's pointed to some of the verses that we've talked about before, and obviously this would be another one that would point to premillennial. But Jesus is reigning as king now, but he's reigning from his throne in heaven and not here on the earth. Any other comments about that verse? All right, let's look at verse 10. And the land shall be turned as a plain from Geba and Rimron, south of Jerusalem, and it shall be lifted up and inhabited in her place, from Benjamin's gate unto the place of the first gate, unto the corner gate, and from the tower of Hananelzeel, the king, unto the king's winepress.
How many gates were at Jerusalem? Were there 12?
12 gates? That's what I was thinking.
Right, you mentioned here Benjamin's gate, so I'm wondering if there's not a gate
For each tribe?
for each people.
Hey, Jeff, look at that book you've got there with the maps and stuff, and see if there's a map of Jerusalem, see how many gates there were, and see where that Benjamin gate might happen to be.
You had the gate called Beautiful.
Right.
Was that the lame man, or
Right?
was that the?
Because it mentions the corner gate here too.
Mm-hmm.
Just wondered.
Well, he's got a book. Is there a map in there, Jerusalem there, Jeff? Is there a map of Jerusalem?
There is, but
Sorry.
Okay, how many,
It looks like there's about 5 or 6.
is there one that's called Benjamin? Or does it actually,
Not for Jerusalem, there's the Essen Gate, the Water Gate, the Golden Gate, the Fish Gate, the Guinness Gate. That's all I see right offhand.
well, you know,
The gate beautiful is at the temple. Evidently, that was the gate they went through to go into the temple.
okay. Of course, when Zechariah was written, no, the temple hadn't been rebuilt yet, because that was one of the things he was trying to get them moving to get the, to get the temple built. It would be interesting to know what the configuration of Jerusalem was back in that time, and I would suspect that probably when Zechariah wrote this, these people had some kind of understanding of the area that he was talking about, but I'm not sure necessarily that they had a meaning. But I think, he's probably talking about the vastness of the kingdom that's going to be established when he talks about all these particular areas.
There's other gates inside the city, but those are the only ones I see that are on the,
I
like
can
you go
count
to.
8 gates,
Yeah,
but that was at the time of Jesus, right?
Well,
Or is there an older one that shows
yeah,
it?
because you have inner walls, and then when they rebuilt the temple, the walls grew, the gates grew.
Okay,
So there were 8 main ones in Old Jerusalem.
okay.
And then when they rebuilt the walls and Jerusalem became bigger,
Mm-hmm.
then there were more gates added.
Okay, that's
There
interesting.
may have been 12, like 4 on the outer wall, 8 on the inner wall.
Well, and that may be true because it talks about north, south, east, and west. So, that would make perfect sense.
but it don't even mention the the Benjamin gate in this map,
Right.
so it's not even on here. Beautiful gate, sheep gate, the water gate, Essene, Essen gate, Gennath gate, fish gate, and then there's a gate, beautiful gate.
I've got a horse gate in mine.
It
How
may
many gates does yours have, Sid?
Sheep, Benjamin, horse.
So the map you're looking at, what time frame does it say? Does it say time of
Jerusalem.
Jesus?
Jerusalem from David to Christ.
Well, that's the same one mine has. They have 4 different colors there. They have one that circles it during the city of David.
Okay.
And then another one that says the suggested extent of Solomon's expansion. And then there's another one that says the suggested extent of Hezekiah's expansion. And then finally, one that shows the extent when Nehemiah rebuilt it, which is the big all the way around it.
Mm-hmm.
So there's multiple gates in all of these different parts of it.
I got the fountain gate.
So as the city expanded, the number of gates expanded.
Yeah.
And there's
Okay.
4 extra ones in the New Testament.
Do what now?
There's 4 extra gates, so there's a total of 12.
Okay.
There was in the outer 4.
Okay. Okay. And I mean, that would make, make perfect sense as the thing expanded. All right, so let's look at verse 11. It says, and men shall dwell in it, and there shall be no more utter destruction, but Jerusalem shall be safely inhabited. So, yeah,
It's easier to protect the gates than the wall,
right.
basically.
Well, and after the the Romans destroyed Jerusalem, it was built back, and it has survived, all this time. And the men, still are inhabited in there, even though it had been destroyed, back in a couple, and it could be a reference back to when they went into captivity. Also, they destroyed the gate, but there was a remnant of people that still, remained there in Jerusalem. Comments about that verse? All right, let's look at verse 12. And this shall be the plague wherein the Lord will smite all the people that have fought against Jerusalem. Their flesh shall be consumed away while they stood upon their feet, and their eyes shall consume away in their holes, and their tongue shall be consumed away in their mouth. And I think this again is probably a reference to the destruction of Jerusalem by the Romans, and obviously that was the will of the Lord that happened. And I think one of the things we need to keep in mind when the Romans did attack Jerusalem and did the siege and they finally broke through, they destroyed pretty much everything that the Jews had as far as records and things like that, because it's my understanding that they had pretty extensive records on like the lineage of everybody, and that was a big thing with the Jews, and all of that was utterly destroyed. And I kind of wonder now in the Jewish religion, how did the rabbis know that they're from the tribe of Levi? I don't think they can, and I think that goes back to the wisdom of God of destroying all that stuff, because if it would still be left there, just think of what confusion and stuff that would cause.
You don't in the Jewish religion today, they don't have sacrifices.
Right.
They have nobody I don't think qualified,
Right.
and they know that.
Right. So when this happened, and of course, obviously, there was a lot of people that were killed in the siege, and it's one thing to fight a battle, and it's another thing to have a siege, because I think in some ways a siege can be more brutal than a battle, because you're bringing you're on a siege, you're affecting everybody, not just the warriors. And it talks about here about the people are still there, but and they were consumed in their holes. They were hiding and trying to get away from the Romans, and the Romans weren't. They were pretty much finding them, and their tongue shall consume away in their mouth. I think that
King James says dissolved.
dissolved.
What you
And
said
it
is,
talks
though,
about, that's in the American Standard.
it says, all of those, their flesh will rot while they're standing there, their eyes will rot in their sockets, and their tongue will rot in their mouth.
That's pretty descriptive.
That's pretty descriptive.
Yeah, and I think.
Samaria, you mentioned they had a siege too.
Mm-hmm.
And same thing happened to them. The people were eating their children and all this.
And if you'll remember, we talked about that in Zechariah. He was prophesying that they were going to be eating each other, basically cannibalism, and that's what happens. That's a pretty good description of a siege. I don't think you could get a better description of that.
Nothing goes in and nothing comes out.
That's right. That's right. And I mean, somewhere, I don't remember where, I think they even poisoned the water supply in Jerusalem. And the way that I think that the way that they did it was they put the dead animals in the water supply, and that's what poisoned the water. So it wasn't enough to kill them, but it was enough to make them really sick. And I can remember back in '85 when we had the big flood over in the Eastern Panhandle. I got sent over to Franklin, and Pendleton County had a whole bunch of chicken farms. And I remember when we got there in the middle of the night, but the next day when I got up and had to go to the facilities, there was dead chickens everywhere. And when we were having our coordinators meeting, they were trying to get water in there, and a lot of people had wells, but their wells had been contaminated with all the dead animals and all the dead chickens and stuff. And they were telling everybody, don't drink the water because it's going to make you sick. It wasn't going to kill you, but it was going to make you sick. And I remember one of the big deals was we needed to get 500 gallons of water a day so that the National Guardsmen could clean up after they were burying dead chickens all the time. And
But they
Yeah, that was, I mean, I've never seen anything like that. In Franklin, they had a little river that went through there. There was 3 rivers that ran through Franklin.
North Branch, the South Branch, and, or the North Fork, the South Fork, and the South Branch of
Yeah.
the Potomac River.
And over on the upper track, the water was so swift that it washed the railroad beds away. I mean, it was, but you know what? Those old WPA bridges stood, but they didn't. Of course, the approaches were all washed away, but the bridges were still there, and there was dead cows up under them. It was, it was awful. It was awful. Anyway, back to what we were doing here. Well, yeah, we were talking about how bad a siege was there. All right, so let's look at verse 13. And it shall come to pass in that day that a great tumult from the Lord shall be among them, and they shall lay hold every one on the hand of his neighbor, and his hand shall rise up against his hand of his neighbor. So, and again, I think that's talking about, you know, what we talked about back in previous chapters about, you know, the cannibalism and all that it was pretty much every man for himself. And, you know, this is the, you know, obviously this was a great tumult that was going to, you know, that was going to happen to the, you know, going to happen to the Jews. And
King
this,
James says panic.
do what?
New King James says panic.
Yeah, that probably, and I'm thinking that, you know, they could see the Romans coming off in you know, in the distance when, you know, when the Roman army was, you know, was coming in, and they shall, you know, they were going to see it, you know, they were going to see it coming. So there probably was a pretty good panic in that day. All right, let's look at verse 14. And Judah also shall fight at Jerusalem, and the wealth of all the heathen around about shall be gathered together, gold, silver, and apparel in great abundance. And so shall be the plague of the horse, of the mule, of the camel, and of the ass, and all the beasts that shall be in these tents as this plague. So, you know, Judah is going to, you know, they're going to end up pretty much, Jerusalem is going to be the final holdout in the destruction. And, you know, there's the heathen, which would be the Romans of that time, are pretty much going to get all the wealth that was in the city at that time. And I'm not sure. I'm not sure exactly about the plague of the horse, the mule, and the camel, but it's some type of destruction that's going to come upon the children. I'm sure every one of these is symbolic of something. And
You know, they would plunder the city and take everything, anything of value.
right.
They would take it.
Right. But you know, you
Everything listed there is their livelihoods.
right. And you know, also though, you've got to wonder though, by the time that siege was over, how many of those animals were even left? They probably, you know, they were probably consumed, you know, in a situation like that. All right, let's look at verse 16. And it shall come to pass that every one that is left of all the nations which came against Jerusalem shall even go up from year to year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, and to keep the feast of the tabernacle. It shall come to pass that everyone that is left of the nation that came against Jerusalem shall even go. I have no idea on that one.
You know, he talks about the people that's left, that is still alive, or the only one he's talking about, or?
Well, I mean,
The one that came, that sieged Jerusalem, so it could be the fact, it could be the Roman Empire, it's all who knows.
well, or talk about just prior to that, 'cause it talks here about keeping the Feast of the Tabernacle. They didn't, the Jewish religion was pretty much destroyed after the destruction of Jerusalem. And, was there enough left of Jerusalem that for them to even worship and keep the feast?
Well, we know that.
But it talks here about the nations that came against Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Those who are left that came against Jerusalem.
Yeah, that came against Jerusalem.
Over in Isaiah, it says, the wealth of the Gentiles shall come upon you.
Mm-hmm.
The multitude of camels shall cover your land and dromedaries. All those from Sheba shall come. That's down in Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
They shall proclaim the praises of the Lord.
Mm-hmm. Well,
They're going to be converted at some point.
Well, but we were talking about, though, when the children of Israel, came to the promised land, they pretty much inherited everything that the Gentiles had, because every time that they would conquer a city, they would inherit the wealth, it referenced, that they were benefiting from things that they didn't do any work for. It was just there for them just because they showed up, type of situation. But this is talking about the nations that are the nations that have come against Jerusalem, and they go up from year to year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, and to keep the Feast of Tabernacles.
Then it goes on, it tells a curse if they don't.
Mm-hmm.
In the next chapter, the next verse.
Right.
So they're going to be, I don't know how they're going to be converted, at what point, or how long, or how much.
Right.
Well, we know when the destruction of Jerusalem came that there were some that scattered and got out.
Right.
So this could be talking about those that were.
It could very well be, because there was a remnant that made it out, and of course the Christians made it out. It was prophesied, that there would be none of them harmed, and they made it out also. So let's look at verse 17. And it shall be that whosoever will not come upon all the families of the earth unto Jerusalem to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, even upon them shall be no rain. Of course, when we were studying this at the very beginning, Zechariah was, they were in a situation where they had withheld the rain, and that was one of the plagues, as it were, that God had put on them, because they weren't finishing the work of the tabernacle, or the temple in this situation. All right, let's move on to 18. And the family of Egypt go not up and come not, that have no rain. There shall be the plague wherewith the Lord will smite the heathen that come not up to keep the feast of the tabernacle. So that seems to me like that the Lord is going to protect the people from the heathens, but there's still going to be a time of problems or plague. That's the way I kind of read that verse. Comments about that verse? All right. Let's look at 19. This shall be the punishment of Egypt, and the punishment of the nations that come not to keep the Feast of the Tabernacles. And in that day there shall be upon the bells of the horses holiness unto the Lord, and the pots in the Lord's house shall be like the bowls before the altar. Yea, every pot in Jerusalem and in Judah shall be holiness unto the Lord of hosts, and all that they sacrifice shall come and take them and seethe therein. And in that day there shall be no more Canaanite in the house of the Lord of hosts. So I think that's kind of, the ending there. It basically is saying that, everything is going to work out in the end, but there's going to be a lot of bumps in the road before they get there. It talks about the pots being like the bowls before the altar, and that would indicate to me that the pots were going to be they were going to be full in the end. It says there shall be no more Canaanite in the house of the Lord of hosts. So hopefully next week Bill will go over this a little bit better. We can see if we were. I'm sure he has
How
a.
close we got.
Yeah, I'm sure he has studied it, and
But I see how you could look at this and think figuratively,
mhm.
language, and go the way of premillennial.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And, when you've got a parallel, the premillennials say that Christ is going to reign on the earth. Well, he's already reigned on the earth. There's going to be a kingdom established. There has been a kingdom established. It's just that they've skipped a step in, they've jumped over what actually happened, and they've taken it too literally.
The premillennialists are the same as the Jews who didn't understand Jesus when he was on the earth.
Pretty much.
Oh, he's gonna come and whoop the Romans, he's gonna be a king on earth.
Well, I mean, and we've talked about this lots of times. Jesus was not the kind of king that they were looking for.
Right.
They were looking for an earthly king who was going to come in grandeur and was going to kick everybody out, and that's not what happened. That's not what happened. So I appreciate everybody's help with that today, and
Hey, Dave,